Me too.
Ah, so this talk is about sexual harassment.
Black Lives Matter.
So this talk is about race?
Occupy Wall Street.
So this talk is about income inequality?
We understand these movements at an intellectual level.
We do. Because looking at some of the actions undertaken by their advocates, I am not sure that those movements understand themselves at an intellectual level.
But I want to talk about our emotional understanding of them.
Our emotional understanding of them. Not a rational understanding, not a logical understanding, but an emotional understanding. Got it.
The feelings they stir in us that we are reluctant to admit. Sure, we may feel sadness, anger, pain. But we also may feel helplessness, defensiveness, denial, fear of being the bad guy, fear of not knowing what to do.
Is fear of being the bad guy an irrational response, given how each of the movements you listed have drawn clear lines as to who should be vilified and who are inherently victimized? And given that each of those movements are based on, and perpetually fueled by, in some cases, various tragedies and outrages, is feeling sadness or anger in relation to them completely unreasonable?
Who do I mean when I say we? I mean we who have privilege. Urban Dictionary defines privilege as the sweet end of the inequality stick.
You are using Urban Dictionary as a citation. Oh, that's right. We're supposed to abandon our intellect for the sake of this presentation. Got it.
Some of us have lucked into more privilege than others, but almost all of us have some privilege relative to others. And you don't have to be a straight white man to have privilege. Put simply, if you heard about movements like these and thought, that doesn't affect me, then you have privilege relative to the people who are affected by those movements.
Wait a second. So, not being affected by something negative that is affecting someone else, that equates to privilege. So, if I'm not currently suffering from a broken leg, but someone else broke their leg yesterday, then I possess unbroken leg privilege, and I have this privilege forever until I break my leg, which means my privilege does not indemnify me from experiencing bad things. It just means that I'm not presently having to deal with a bad thing. So, likewise, until I do get hit by a bus, I have not getting hit by bus privilege. Got it.
I'm not here to blame anyone for being dealt an ace in the poker game of life. But the thing about privilege is that having it usually means we don't have to think about it.
Yes. Not currently being hit by a bus means not having to think about being hit by a bus. Unless I want to live in a constant state of fear and paranoia.
It's like breathing. We don't realize that our experience is a function of privilege, until we hear someone else say, "I can't breathe."
Right. Because thinking about that phrase emotionally, and not intellectually, our speaker conjures the image of a man being choked to death. And I suppose we are meant to feel as though it was a profound notion and somehow be shamed by it. Even though this isn't about blame.
I'm not here to blame anyone, whether we know it or not. Some of the discomfort we may feel around these types of movements is a result of our privilege being shoved in our faces.
Or, perhaps, the discomfort comes from being vilified or made suspect on the basis of gender, race, or economic status, simply on the basis of residing on the problematic end of the relevant spectrum, merely on the basis of bad acts undertaken by individuals who also possess those characteristics. In other words, guilt by association, where that association begins and ends with gender and or race and or bank account.
One of the first times I became aware of my own privilege, I was 20, approaching a college bar that let in pretty much any student, regardless of how fake their ID.
So, you were too young to drink, so you committed a felony to get into a bar. Got it.
I was with two fellow students, one white, one black. My white friend and I easily got into the bar. Our black friend was turned away. But not because his ID was fake.
So, his ID was fake, just like yours. But that wasn't the reason he was turned away, even though he shouldn't have been there in the first place. Got it. And so, what was the real reason?
Because they saw the color of his skin, and they didn't believe he was a student.
Is that what the guy said at the door? Out loud? In public? They said, "You're too black to be a student?" Well, golly, I totally believe you.
Standing there in the cold, I didn't know how to say to my friend, "I see you, and I see what is happening to you."
You didn't know how to use your words? Well, I guess college helped with that.
So I said nothing. I went into the bar, and he went home alone.
Wow. You were a crappy friend to that guy.
In that moment, I felt powerless.
Actually, in that moment, you made a choice.
As I imagine many of you have felt powerless to make a difference in issues that are so large and pervasive. We feel unqualified to make meaningful change. We think of activism as someone else's job.
Or we may all have different ideas about what constitutes activism. Voting the way I see fit, or quietly donating money to, or raising awareness of issues and causes that I care about in my own way works for me. But I assume that my definition of activism is flawed due to my privilege, right?
Right?
But we are all invited to be activists, beginning the moment our privilege is reflected back to us and we don't like what we see.
Let me see if I understand this. The moment that someone attempts to guilt trip me into feeling responsible for things that I have nothing to do with, that is the moment that I need to begin supporting my accuser's cause. Got it.
I never considered myself an activist. I thought that being one would mean restructuring my entire life in the pursuit of justice. I pictured revolutionaries leading people through the streets. And that is activism. But activism can take so many forms.
So, how do you know by looking at someone that they are not an activist in their own way? And what do you say of someone who is an activist, but just not one working in favor of your preferred causes?
The start of my activism looked like creating a podcast to learn more about social inequity. Later, I attended trainings on reproductive rights, grassroots organizing, LGBTQ justice. I started volunteering on a political campaign. And now, I'm quitting my marketing career to pursue a master's of public health.
Ah, yes, the public health degree. Something I have heard about before and seems to be quickly evolving into what might otherwise be called a degree in social justice.
I'm not saying this is the path you should take to activism. I'm saying I didn't become an activist overnight. I'm hesitant to call myself one now.
Our speaker makes activist sound like being a member of a religion. Funny, that.
But I made an effort to understand my privilege and then reckon with the uncomfortable emotions that came up as a result of that. The emotions like denial, defensiveness, helplessness that came up for me that night outside the bar.
So you have acknowledged and confronted your sin, and have been reborn into a more enlightened, purified creature, able to see the sin in others and help guide them to a more pious and righteous existence. Got it.
And by dealing with those emotions related to my privilege, I could then use my privilege to make small, seemingly unrevolutionary changes in my life. Until one day I woke up and looked around and thought, this looks a lot like activism.
I wonder if our speaker, at some point in this presentation, is going to acknowledge her TEDx privilege to her non-TEDx platform privileged audience.
No one has the perfect prescription for what your activist starter kit will look like.
No one does? Then why should anyone listen to you?
But here are 5 things I've learned along the way that we can do or notice when we don't do every day.
Notice when we don't do. There is a beautiful, nonsensical nature to that phrase.
1, defer. Defer to marginalized people when making decisions that will impact them.
Abdicate all of one's critical thinking to other people merely on the basis of their representative demographic percentage. Got it.
If you don't have a uterus, defer to people who do have uteruses when making decisions about what they can do with their uteruses.
So, if a woman who has a uterus votes a man into office on the basis of that man's stance on reproductive rights, and that man then represents that perspective as they legislate, then that man should not be criticized for his stance or votes, as he is, by proxy, representing someone with a uterus. Got it.
2, call out inequality when we see it. Whether with our friends, family, or colleagues, if we are not discussing the toxicity of inequality, we are contributing to a culture of inequality. I'm not here to blame anyone. Three, make room at the table for those whose lives don't look like ours, especially when it's a literal table. There's a term for all male panels. They're called manels. Don't be caught near one.
Don't be caught near an all-male panel. A manel. Doesn't matter the topic or the level of expertise of the men involved, just don't be caught near one. So, our speaker is a sexist. Got it. But what if the manel consists of men from marginalized groups? Whatever am I to do then?
4, own our mistakes. We will make them because culturally ingrained biases don't reverse themselves overnight.
Yes, that requires intensive re-education.
I regret the mistake I made that night outside the bar.
Lying about your age and possessing forged documents, or abandoning your friend to go drink without him.
And I learned from it. And 5, respect. Respect that marginalized people don't owe us, the people on the sweet end of the inequality stick, anything.
Do they owe taxes?
They don't owe it to us to explain their oppression to us. We can go to the library for that.
So, all marginalized people are oppressed, and non-marginalized people are not oppressed. And if we don't think about the oppressions that don't affect us, then we are privileged and contributing to the problem. But if we inquire of people about their oppressions, we're assuming a stance of their owing us something, and thus we are contributing to the problem. It almost seems like no matter what someone does, they're doing the wrong thing.
They don't owe it to us to assuage our guilt. We can go to a therapist for that. I'm not here to blame anyone, and they don't owe it to us to come up with the solutions to their own oppression. We have to look inside of ourselves for that.
Finding a solution to a problem requires understanding the problem. If we are disallowed from understanding the problem from the perspective of those said to be suffering from the problem, how can a solution ever be created?
These are just 5 things, and maybe they seem small. But what if we didn't wait to think about our own privilege until the next time a trans woman comes forward about her assault? Until the next time a Muslim is attacked on a bus in the suburbs? Until the next time an unarmed black man is shot?
Those are some awfully extreme scenarios. Actions that the majority of the population would either never commit or never have occasion to even consider. It's almost like you're making an appeal to emotion or something.
What if we all started by noticing the little manifestations of our privilege swirling all around us, and then using that privilege to disrupt the status quo?
Privilege, as defined by anything negative that is not currently happening to me. Because even if I have crippling depression, I'm not currently being hit by a bus now, am I?
Thinking back to that night outside the bar, I probably couldn't have called out the bouncer. Given that, fake ID in hand, I was committing a felony, it wasn't the best time to get on my high horse.
Well, that is some refreshing self-deprecation right there. And I wonder what amends our speaker has made to redress the risk she put to the bar owner's liquor license and the bouncer's job by committing said felony.
But what if my activism that night had looked like validating the painfulness of my friend's experience? What if it had looked like walking home with him?
Yeah, imagine that.
What if, by all of us incorporating these seemingly unrevolutionary actions into our daily lives, at our local bar, at our Starbucks down the street, we actually help to fuel the revolution?
Fuel the revolution with booze and overpriced coffee?
We all have a role to play as activists. Are you ready to start playing yours? Thank you.
That gets a standing ovation. Really. Well, I'd like to solve this horrible issue once and for all. A way to make everyone equal using the understanding that, in one way or another, we all operate under different circumstances. Which is why I am proud to present privilege. The privilege that everyone has. The privilege of knowing that we each live different lives, with different pros and different cons. The privilege you can know for a fact that everyone has, including you, making you no more or less better than anyone else. Privilege will help increase empathy across all races, both genders, and all creeds. Because, in the end, we really are all in this together, whatever our individual circumstances. And we should look upon one another for who we are, and not what we have or do not have. Man, wouldn't that be nice? Well, one can dream, I suppose. As always, thank you for watching.